Brilliant. No, thanks, Etienne. Thanks everyone for joining, for being here, and thanks for the invite. It's a bit of an honor, really, especially speaking after so many inspiring, so many inspiring stories. So amazing work that everyone's doing. So I just want to share a bit about my story. So my background, sporting wise, is from rowing. So it goes back quite a long way. Most of my experience really was as a junior. So from 2002 to 2004, I was part of the junior GB team. So I guess pretty humble experience compared to so many of the Olympic achievements and medals that are here tonight. But I got an exposure to the sort of the privilege and honor of representing your country, and really just the exposure to the passion and the energy from international sport, but really from any sport. And I think something that I'm sure a lot of people here can relate to is what do you do with that energy? What do you do with that passion? It's very hard to find something really outside of sport where you can harness that, where you can use that, where the way in which people work together towards something, just in such unity, as I say, with such passion, and so driven to just find every inch, every percent you can. I had a few injuries, so I had to make the decision relatively early on. I tried to continue after junior, and long story short, but it wasn't the sort of the career that maybe I hoped it might be. So I'd always wanted to fly. I come from 3 generations of pilots. My grandfather flew in the war and flew commercially. My dad flew for his whole career, and since I was about 5 or 6 years old, I wanted to fly as well. So I knew that once I had, at whatever point I stopped rowing, then I would learn to fly. So that's what I did. I had to take a big loan, had a fair few obstacles along the way in terms of how I got to the point where I did, to eventually get a sort of dream airline job, as it were. And it's just what I always imagined I want to do. Whilst it didn't necessarily take that same harness, that energy that I talked about from sport, I suppose for me it was the next best thing, and I was very passionate about it. As I said, it's something I really, really wanted to do. And it's hard to know what point I started to join the dots. And this is the expression I use a lot. What point did something not start to just not quite feel right? And about 5 years ago, I moved to a vegan lifestyle. That's just, and again, I don't quite know exactly what triggered that, just a sense of what felt right to me. Soon after that, I got the opportunity through a few people that I knew to start. And again, compared to the story from Hugo earlier, it's pretty humble, but we started a group called Rowers Against Rubbish, which was really just looking at local projects to along the same sort of lines, but really that sort of passion for the waterways, for the rowing, and in fact, the general sort of water-based sports community to sort of utilize that. So we did a few local activities, and again, without going, there's different examples of what we did that I'd be happy to talk about. But I think the reason I particularly mention that is I think that what that did is it helped me to think a little bit differently. But when it came to something like plastic waste, it was relatively easy to connect to, I think, because it didn't really require me to challenge anything I was doing significantly. Well, the changes that I was personally choosing to make in terms of products that I bought or didn't buy, none of it really challenged me, and they weren't particularly difficult conversations to have. But at some point, I connected the dots and sort of, if I started thinking, well, if I care so much about that, why don't I care so much about the impact of what I do for a living? And I think for a long time, I'd lived in this world of cognitive, kind of cognitive dissonance, and I'm very interested in this sort of decognitive factors. And that's actually what I do now professionally. The areas of training that I was involved in when I was flying around human factors and communication, our cognitive processes, is what I now deliver to other sectors, mostly the veterinary sector. And I was very interested in this, and I realized that I just metaphorically had my fingers in my ears. And I was so conditioned to believe that what I was doing was okay, that there were lots of reasons to look to convince myself that, aviation is only, inverted commas, 2% of global CO2, and there's no viable means, alternatives, and all those sort of things. But I think really it was then, when we were expecting our first child, that I really then started to think beyond just what I wanted and what I expected, what I thought was okay, and what I think really mattered, and the truth, I suppose. And then, the science around aviation does become a little bit more frightening when you start to realize that it's not 2%, it's actually closer to sort of 7%. When you look at the non-CO2 warming effects of aviation, then you start to realize that, in 2018, much less than 5% of the world flew commercially, and it's contributing, maybe 7 or 8% of our total greenhouse gas emissions, and it just starts to feel really conflicted. And I felt very lonely because you can imagine the sort of conversations I've ever brought this up in a cockpit on a flight, the sort of things that people would say. I then got to know some of the members, the founding members of Safe Landing, the group that I'm now involved in. So George is actually with us tonight, and a few other people that were involved in the original group, and just having that sense of sort of not feeling alone anymore when you feel conflicted is quite remarkable. And so we set about having conversations about what we could do, and I have to say I can't claim to be in that core group in the same way that maybe a few others are at the moment, particularly someone called Todd and Finley are the real kind of core group, and George, who's here, is also very involved. But essentially, just in a nutshell, Safe Landing is a group of aviation workers, current and former, who are looking to navigate what I would consider to be a truly sustainable future for the industry. So, as I said, these are people working within or used to work within the profession. And it's based around sort of 4 major demands, as it were. The first one is about being honest about the total environmental impact of flying. And this honesty, I think, is really important, starting with the end in mind, rather than just mindless growth, justifying how we can achieve growth. It's actually saying, well, what do we need to achieve in terms of the environmental impact? And what does that look like in terms of growth, or in fact, most likely degrowth? It's being realistic about the limits of technology to solve the problem. It's being transparent about the future regulations required to reduce emissions, and having a plan that accounts for this. And I think the big thing here is about supporting workers during the transition. One of the things that Safe Landing is about, it's not about just saying, flight shame, anyone who flies is bad, people who work in the industry are awful, and we have to stop for the sake of our children. There is some truth around the fact that we do need to fly less, but what we're trying to do is actually acknowledge that if we don't start to make changes now, the people that depend on aviation are going to suffer actually much more in not that many years from now, because it's going to have to stop an awful lot more quickly, and it's going to be pretty dramatic. So it's about kind of acknowledging that, and it's about doing different things as a group who are within, or were at least part of this group, to action that change. And so I liken it a lot to that. This is the first time I've felt that opportunity to utilize that sort of sporting energy, that passion, that drive, and sort of finding a place for that almost. So that's maybe how I would link, where the sporting background to where my place within that sits. I've also just got a sort of a social media platform, and I guess I've called myself the Earth Pilot, really. And all I'm trying to do with that is share stories, share my story. And the way I talk about it is about helping people to compassionately helping people to join the dots. For whatever reason, I was able to join some dots, and I've made some decisions that I believe help me to live more in accordance with the values that I want to, in the way that I want to live. And I want to help other people do that. So I haven't actually flown now for over 2 years. I stopped flying. I chose to stop altogether. It's not because I think that in itself is going to change the world, but I believe that it is important that you are, that you are the change that you want to see, whatever that looks like. And all I'm trying to do is tell stories at a personal level to help other people to maybe join some dots that they haven't joined before, without necessarily telling them what they need to do. And as I said, Safe Landing is looking more broadly at what they can, ways we can campaign, how we can actually gather a growing group from within the profession to start saying this and sharing this message, as well as I said, different forms of campaigning, and looking at the sort of policies that need to be in place to achieve what we need to achieve. So in a nutshell, that's me. That's what, and like I said, there's other bits of details within those stories that I'm happy to elaborate on, but that's me.